Welcome to our 28th Rising Tide Ocean podcast. I'm David Helvarg here with my co-host, Vicki Nichols-Goldstein.
Well, hello there, everyone.
And today we're talking with an old friend and amazing adventurer, Roz Savage. Roz is the first and so far only woman to row solo across the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. Also the first Brit. She holds several Guinness World Records and is now known as Dame Roz Savage after being appointed a member of the Order of the British Empire for her services to fundraising and the environment, particularly that 71% of the environment that's saltwater, and that she probably knows more intimately than almost any other human being on Earth. So welcome, Roz, and let's start with this. As a little girl, you didn't dream of growing up and rowing your own way across the world's oceans, did you?
Most definitely not. No, I was probably girl least likely to row across oceans or indeed do anything remotely energetic. No, I was really hopeless at all sports at school. I was the bookworm. But maybe the formative influence from that time was my parents, both of whom were Methodist preachers. So maybe I grew up with this general idea that it's important to have a purpose in this life, some sense of calling or vocation, and to try and leave the world a slightly better place, hopefully, than we found it.
And yet initially you moved into like management consulting, or I hear there's a story about an obituary you wrote for yourself.
Yeah. The management consulting was definitely my belated teenage rebellion, buying into the materialistic myth after the more frugal circumstances of my childhood. Yeah, I totally bought into the Thatcherite, Reaganite story that success and happiness is all about having the yuppie job and the big house and all of the material things. And yet I think on some level I knew right from the start that was not what was really going to bring me joy and fulfillment. And what really brought that home to me, well, first of all, was the fact that after 11 years working a corporate job, I was profoundly miserable. So clearly money was not buying me happiness. But then also, as you say, David, the obituary exercise, I sort of borrowed from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I expect you're familiar with. And habit number 2 is begin with the end in mind. And the exercise invites you to start with the ultimate end in mind, your own funeral, and to imagine what people are going to be saying about you if you carry on as you are, and alternatively, what you would like them to be saying about you. And when I sat down and did that exercise over 20 years ago now, I realized that I was not on track for a life that I could be proud of. So yeah, some things had to change.
So normally somebody in that situation might decide to, run a marathon or start up a new business. This seems a very dramatic change to decide to row hundreds of miles alone in the ocean. How did you get from this point where you're kind of writing the end to completely transforming your life?
Well, thousands of miles. Well, I did actually run a couple of marathons because people had said you find out things about yourself in the last 6 miles of a marathon. I did find out things about myself, specifically that I really hate running. I did also try starting a couple of new businesses, which were very informative experiences. After I quit my corporate job, there was actually a period of about 4 years between then and me deciding to row across oceans. And I call those 4 years my happy dabbling phase, when I was really trying to figure out who am I, what brings me joy. I tried various different enterprises and learned something from all of them. None of them felt like a perfect fit. I think as humans, we're fairly poor at knowing exactly what's going to work for us unless we actually try it. And then through a weird series of just synchronicities and serendipities, I'd met a friend who had rowed across the Atlantic with his mother, of all people. And so suddenly those adventurer people that up until that point in my life all seemed to be bearded, and I clearly didn't qualify on that score. To find out that someone's mother could go out and have a pretty major adventure. And the fact that I'd rowed before, somehow all of these things just clicked into place. And I wish I could say that I had the idea, but I would actually say it was more that the idea had me. I don't know if you've ever had this experience when you've been obsessing over a question, a problem, an issue for quite a while, like 6 months, and desperately yearning for an answer. And then suddenly, when you're not really focusing on the question, an answer that you totally didn't expect just comes out of left field and blindsides you. And you go, oh my word, that is the best idea that I ever had. And then your ego mind kicks in and goes, no, that's actually seriously a totally terrible idea. you have no, other than being able to row, you have no credentials to be able to do this.
So you'd rowed in college.
Yeah, but being able to row is about 1% of what it takes to row across an ocean. It really doesn't help all that much by yourself. Yeah, it's much more about seamanship. It's about keeping your boat together, your body together, and your mind together, as I was to learn. But I do think that for me personally, there was something really helpful about having rowed before, because it gave me the misguided delusion that rowing across oceans was something that I was vaguely qualified to do. You know, it didn't really seem that hard. And I suspect, as any parent would acknowledge, if we knew at the outset what we learn later about just how big a challenge is, we'd probably never leave the harbour. So my first ocean was going to be the Atlantic, which is not exactly the nursery slope of oceans. There isn't really a nursery slope, but it is the smallest of the big three and the most often rowed. And I spent 14 months getting ready for it, buying a boat, getting fit, raising money, getting the boat all fitted out with the solar panels and all of the equipment that I was going to need, taking the training courses in navigation and meteorology and communications. So I thought I was really ready for it, but I didn't realise I'd picked the worst possible year to row across the Atlantic. It was the year of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita and Wilma. And in fact, there were 28 named storms that year, which makes it by far the worst year on the Atlantic in recorded history. So pretty soon after I set out from the Canaries off the coast of Africa, the big waves, the heavy weather just started to take its toll. I got tendonitis in my shoulders, oars started to break. I had 4 oars with me. They all broke before I got halfway across. So I got really good at oar fixing. Camping stove broke, so no hot food after 12 hours of rowing in the day. And later on, my satellite phone, which was my only way of communicating with shore, that also broke. So yeah, in short, there wasn't a single day when I didn't ask myself, why the hell did this ever seem like a good idea? But I'm really, really glad that I had the 2 massive motivations. One was the environmental mission. You know, I really wanted to use this platform through my blogs and my talks and my books, blogs while I was on the ocean and talks and books once back on dry land, to talk about what we're doing to our precious planet. And then there was also this really deep-rooted personal exploration of having had, I would say, a pretty easy life up to that point. I was lucky enough to be in this position of choosing my challenges. You know, a lot of people get a wake-up call when they are bereaved or divorced or get a diagnosis. And it's then that we really find out what we can handle. Like, when we really up against it, what can we find in terms of resourcefulness or courage? And like I say, I was lucky enough to choose my own challenge. And boy, did the Atlantic challenge me every single day. But it felt like a rite of passage, really, a coming of age, ocean crossing. And I found out that I was capable of a heck of a lot more than I'd ever even dare to imagine. And I genuinely think we all are. I mean, there's really nothing special about me. I don't particularly look like a rower, as I've already said. I'm not particularly athletic. I didn't know that I was brave until I needed to be. That's really the essence of it.
So you came into Antigua in what, 2005 or 6?
Yep, left the Canaries in 2005 and arrived in Antigua March 13th, 2006. Not that it's indelibly imprinted on my memory.
Well, here's the amazing thing. You spoke out for the ocean that you crossed, and you discovered a lot about yourself and your capabilities. And what a heroic journey. And then a year later, my friend Margot Pellegrino introduces me to you, and you want to row another larger ocean, the Pacific. What was going on? What is going on?
Well, actually, the intention right from the start had been the original intention was to row around the world. But then once I found out more about how oceans work, I discovered that although you can sail around the world, rowing, you're much more at the mercy of the winds and the currents. You're going much more slowly than a sailboat does. So I found out that realistically, I could only row across the world's big three oceans. So even though the Atlantic had been really, really hard, every time that I had a little insight into how I could do this better the next time around, it actually really helped me that I was already expecting to do a couple more oceans. So I really felt that I was learning a lot on the Atlantic about how not to row across an ocean, and that I would do it better the next time. And also because on the Atlantic, for most of the time, I felt like I was hanging onto my sanity by my fingertips. I felt I hadn't really fully stepped into that environmental advocacy role that had been the initial motivation. So yeah, to me, it was obvious that I was going to carry on and do the Pacific. But as you know, David, that didn't go quite according to plan either.
August 21st, 2007, you described to me, you said it felt like a car on the train track suddenly being slammed in the side by a full-on locomotive. What happened on that day? You were 140 miles off California. What was the scene? Please tell us.
Yeah, I'd set out from Crescent City, way up near the border with Oregon, and realistically, weather forecasts are only accurate to about a week out. So my weatherman could send me out into favourable conditions, but neither of us could tell what was going to happen a bit further out. So I got to 10 days out from the coast and ran into big waves, heavy weather, and my boat was really capsizing more than it should have been. So these ocean rowboats, they're designed to self-right if they capsize. Still not a load of laughs while it's happening, but it seemed strange that it was that much more unstable than it had been on the Atlantic. And as I've already said, the weather on the Atlantic was pretty atrocious. So long story short, I'd mentioned on my blog that I was having a few issues out there. I'd lost my sea anchor. The boat and I were getting a little bit dinged up, and somebody decided that I ought to be rescued by the US Coast Guard, which would not have been my choice, but there we go. Should we say it was an excess of gallantry? So the first I knew of this was when a Coast Guard fixed-wing plane showed up overhead, and there then ensued a very long conversation about whether or not I should be rescued, with the Coast Guard very much being of the view that I should be, and me very much being of the view that I shouldn't be. But ultimately, it came to the crunch about an hour before sunset, when I was already right on the edge of the potential rescue by a helicopter, which has a limited range from the coast. And there's a saying in the adventure world that it's better to be a live donkey than a dead lion. And given that I'd lost some important equipment, I decided to accept the rescue. But yeah, that was a bad day at the office. Because unfortunately, bad news gets a lot more coverage than good news. So my rescue got many more press column inches than any of my successors ever did. But hey, all the more publicity for the environmental mission.
I'm sorry, you had me at my boat was capsizing more than it should have. Most of us think once is more than it should.
Did you feel like your life was in danger with your loss of equipment, with the capsizing? I mean, did you ever feel truly afraid and somewhat relieved that you had an out?
Actually, the scariest bit was the rescue itself, because after the Atlantic crossing, I really trusted my boat. It took a while for me to develop that trust, because when you're in that little cabin and the waves are crashing around, it's really noisy in there. And the first couple of weeks on the Atlantic, I couldn't believe that the boat wasn't going to just disintegrate under the pressure of the water. But by the time I got to the Pacific, the boat had already taken good care of me. But then when you get rescued or airlifted, you have to jump out of your boat and into these 25-foot waves to get over to the rescue swimmer, the guy who's hanging on the end of the line from the helicopter. And suddenly your boat looks like a real haven of safety compared with jumping out of it. I also really want to say that I have the utmost respect for the US Coast Guard, and I don't mean to sound ungrateful to them for, I realise they were also putting their lives in danger. And in fact, we did almost run out of fuel on the way back to shore because they were right on the edge. And then the place we were going to land got socked in with fog, as the California coast tends to. So it was nearly an even worse day at the office for everybody. So I am grateful to them. And I'm actually still in touch with the pilot of the helicopter. It's strange the way that you make friends on oceans.
And were they able to rescue your boat?
Great question, Vicky. No, unfortunately, that's not part of the Coast Guard deal. So I arrived back on land with no ID, no money, only the clothes that I stand up in. I was brought back to Northern California, had to somehow get back to San Francisco and launch a salvage attempt, because my boat was now officially flotsam and jetsam, and if somebody else had got to it first, under the law of the sea, it would have been theirs. So there was a pressure of time, and luckily, I just have some amazing, wonderful friends in the Bay Area who rallied around, helped me charter a research vessel, sail out under the Golden Gate Bridge, go salvage my boat.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yes, it was crazy.
That is definitely part of your adventure.
And the next season, it didn't deter you, though. The next season, you relaunched at nighttime out of Sausalito under the Golden Gate.
So, came back to shore, put 200 pounds of lead resined into the bottom of the boat to help give it more stability. And as David says, the following year, set out under the Golden Gate Bridge from Horseshoe Cove. And it was amazing to be able to leave from San Francisco itself. Although I do have to say, it's a very difficult city to leave, because rowers face backwards as we're in the boat. So we pull on the oars. And as I'm watching one of my favourite cities on the planet receding into the distance, a part of me was going, just tell me again, why are we doing this?
We spoke with Anna Cummings previously in one of our podcasts. And she was talking about how you and her husband, Marcus, who was also sailing on his junk raft, met up in the middle of the ocean, and you each had something to share. And it seemed pretty remarkable, like these two little dots connecting and really making each other's trips successful. Can you tell us about that?
So this was on my second attempt at the leg from California to Hawaii. And both of my water makers had failed, both the electrical one and the manual one. So I was going to either have to ration my water severely or just be very thirsty for a while. And yes, exactly, the junk raft that was also out there to raise awareness around the North Pacific garbage patch. Somebody pointed out, somebody who was following both of our adventures, observed that we were sort of converging. Although when I say converging, the Pacific is really, really big. And we were both in very slow and not particularly maneuverable boats. So it actually took an enormous amount of effort and coordination for these two dots to find themselves within sight of each other. And I actually had to turn around and row back towards them, because otherwise, like, as a sailboat, they kept moving during the night. As a rowboat, when I stopped rowing, I'm really just going at current speed. So we didn't want to be literally ships passing in the night, and there was a real danger of that. And yes, I was very keen to get a resupply of water, and they were also quite keen to get a resupply of food, because they were running low and were down to very, very limited rations. So yeah, we met up a couple of 100 miles east of Hawaii for one of the world's more unusual dinner parties. We managed to find ourselves on the same spot of ocean, connect the boats together, and Joel, Marcus's crewmate, caught us a lovely fish very sustainably with a harpoon from under their boat, and we had a fish supper together. I think I had about 5 helpings because I'd not been doing my own fishing, but they had it down to a fine art. And yeah, it was sort of a real bonding experience. So I'd decided in advance that I was going to do the Pacific in 3 stages, because it's really, really big. And also because, yeah, it'd be a shame to row straight past Hawaii without dropping in for a few cocktails and to catch up with old friends, David. So yes, after Hawaii, so we're now in 2009, I rowed from Hawaii to the Republic of Kiribati, which, with full disclosure, I have to confess, I had not heard of. Rowing across oceans has done wonders for my knowledge of ocean geography. So the Republic of Kiribati is one of these small island nations that has very little land that's more than a couple of feet above sea level. So they're really in the front line of climate change. And it was quite poignant, actually, because yes, I arrived there after a 3-month voyage from Hawaii and met with the president and quite a few of his staff there, and then saw them again that winter in Copenhagen at the COP15 climate change conference. And it was just after really the whole conference had fallen apart. You know, there had been such hope that the COP15 was going to lead to a fair and binding deal on climate change. And, you know, as we ocean people know, what's happening in the air is happening even more so in the oceans, with ocean acidification, often described as climate change's evil twin. So yes, some crashing disappointments in the process, I would say, that winter in Copenhagen, and this feeling amongst the Kiribati delegation that almost their death warrant as a nation had been signed. So that was that really brought it home to me what the human face of climate change looks like. And then from Kiribati, I carried on the following year, 2010, to Papua New Guinea, which was also a fascinating experience. A country so rich in natural resources, but being exploited by big corporations, backhanders to the government, corruption, no benefit to the local people whose ancestral heritage is really being stolen from them.
And so you're becoming, a highly informed rower to the challenges that we face as a species.
Indeed. And then even the Indian Ocean, my third and final ocean, which was my longest single non-stop voyage, 5 months alone at sea from Australia to Mauritius. I had to
on the coast of Africa.
Exactly. I'd originally wanted to come into India, but this was 2011, which was just when the whole piracy in the Arabian Gulf was really hitting its peak. So then I started learning more about why are there Somalian pirates? What's going on there? So, like I say, it's really been a crash course in global affairs, and opened my eyes to what's going on in the world and how can we expect people to, like in these developing countries where on Maslow's hierarchy, they're just trying to meet basic needs. It's really hard to get them to care about the environment when their need for food and shelter and water is so much more pressing. So again, it comes back to economics. Until we have an equitable economic model that supports regeneration and will pay people to work in regeneration, I just think that's a really crucial part of the puzzle.
As someone who has spent thousands of days at sea to raise awareness about the ocean, I wanted to ask you, are you seeing people's attitudes changing about the environment, about the planet, about the ocean?
I am. It's difficult to know from my own self-selecting sample of friends whether that is a general thing. But actually, I do think by any objective measure, I think we've come a very long way since I had my environmental awakening in 2003. I think there is so much more information out there, the books, the films, that I also think it's being made easier for people to do the right thing. So I do feel the shift happening, and also I still feel like we need a quantum leap. Even during lockdown, CO2 levels in the atmosphere are still rising because of the time lag inherent in the system. And I do think that shift is going to look like the recognition that everything is connected, that everything we as an individual do day to day makes a difference. And it's up to us to choose whether we're making a difference for the better or for the worse. I think we're recognizing more and more that the damage that we do to the natural world is actually damaging us. Like, the planet will do fine without the humans. The humans without a healthy planet, not so much. So I do think that recognition is happening. And I love it how many books are coming out now about the intelligence of the natural world, whether that is individual species of animals, of even plants. More and more intelligence is being discovered everywhere. And so I think the respect for our natural world is just increasing dramatically at the moment. And yes, please, more of that.
Keep up the good work. I love how you have a purpose and you continue on and you inspire others. So it's a joy, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Roz.
Bless you both. And it's been so lovely to spend this time with you. And I do hope that before too long, circumstances might permit us to meet up other than in little rectangles on a screen.
Rising Tide is a production of Blue Frontier with host David Helberg and support from Natasha Benjamin, Ellie Curlow, and myself, Vicki Nichols-Goldstein. Rising Tide's editing services and additional technical support are provided by Studio Cape May of San Diego, California. The theme song is written and performed by Ethan Kenbark. You can find Rising Tide, the Ocean Podcast, at www.bluefront.org or download it anytime from Apple, Google, or Spotify.
Off in the salty ocean, off where the waves roll free, the sparkling water rises, then crashes to the sea. Out amongst the breakers, you'll have no need to fear. It's true, it's the blue frontier. Off in the salty ocean, off to the blue frontier.
Sparky, come here, buddy. Sparky! There you are, good boy, Sparky.